Hey there, everybody. This is Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. Today, I'm joined by friend of the show, Gareth Brookes. He's filling in for Sean while Sean's on his cross-country move from San Diego to St. Paul, Minnesota. Thanks for joining, Gareth.
That's you're very welcome. I look forward to it. I enjoyed the last time we had a chat, so I was definitely up for coming on again and filling in for Sean.
Well, and you've brought us you brought us a great book today, one that you recommended to me, and I was when I read it, I was like, oh my God, we've got to talk about this. Can you show? I've got mine set up on a camera. Can you show people and tell them about what we're talking about?
Cyberman by Veronika Muchitsch. I think that's how you pronounce. Not Veronika Muchitsch, rather. Sorry.
Muchitsch. Okay.
I think
I would
that's
have
how you
butchered
pronounce
that.
Muchitsch. Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, this is the book. And like I know you enjoyed it. So why don't you start off and give your thoughts? Because I am slightly biased as Myriad Editions is a publisher that I've been involved with for the past 10 years that I'm very close to. So maybe a little biased. Let's hear what you think.
Well, I wanted to ask you, is that how you came across the book? Is just because you're familiar with their catalog?
I saw Veronika's work in the Now Fantagraphics Now.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember which one, the one with the frog on the front, which is kind of interesting because she is a UK-based artist, and generally, you just kind of people are about on the scene, and you just sort of get to know them. But with her, it was like seeing it in the Fantagraphics, but just kind of like out of nowhere. It was really, really interesting. She's based in a town called Falmouth, and I don't know if you're familiar with Cornwall, but you know how like the UK looks like a witch riding a pig. So you've got Scotland's like the witch's hat, and then Wales is the pig's head.
Okay.
And the front pig's trotter is Cornwall, and Falmouth is right on the very end, and it's quite. There's a good art college there, Falmouth College of Art, that produces some good illustration students, and every now and again some really good comic artists. But it is quite isolated, and I can see, it takes about 6 hours or something to get on the train to London. So I can see kind of how if you're based there, you would just go, I'm going to send my work to Fantagraphics rather than like try and kind of join in with the stuff that's going on in London or Leeds or Glasgow, which is even further away.
Do you know if she went to the school there? Because I get the sense this is somebody who's definitely like trained not just in illustration, but like kind of the modern conceptual approaches to art, it seems like.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Yeah. So yeah, that's how I came across her work. But she won so Myriad run graphic novel competition. I think it's supposed to be every year, every 2 years, but sometimes the what with global crises and things like that, it depends. But the first one was in 2013, and I won that competition, and that's how I had my first book published. And so I think they're on the fourth one, and Veronika won the fourth one. Okay. So that's kind of, I always keep an eye on who the people shortlisted and longlisted are for that. But they always publish the shortlist as well. So it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like a few people from the shortlist. So everyone's a winner.
So you're award siblings. This is an award sibling of yours.
That is correct. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I would say the same. Like the one that you're talking about in Fantagraphics Now is the one with the people like eating on camera.
Yeah, I think so. I've lost it somewhere in my studio, but yeah, it's kind of, is it not like an office environment or something like that they're in? Or am I completely wrong?
I think there's two pieces by her that were in the Now. The one that I remember off the top of my head that made me go looking for her work on Instagram, which is kind of where I saw this. Like I was looking at it already, and then you were like, "Oh, I'd like to talk about that." I was like, "Yeah, I'll order that." Was the there was one where it was like people eating, similar to this, where she's recording people's behavior, online behavior, and they're like eating in front of the camera. It's a Japanese thing, and she was like documenting that thing where they eat on camera and you can like have a meal with somebody
Okay,
like pre-recorded.
right.
That's what I remembered. Um,
Okay, maybe I haven't seen all her work then.
yeah, there was another one I don't remember as clearly as that one, but I was really intrigued by the like documenting digital behavior. So then this
Mm,
book is exactly that in
yeah,
a really fascinating way. So you want to just jump in and take a look at the book?
yeah. I mean, like I think on the face of it, it's like no, it's not for everyone. I think there's some people that will be, say nothing happens in it or there's no plot, but which is kind of true. But it's so rich. Like I've read it 3 times now, and there's always more to kind of uncover in these in the kind of space. There's so much space in it, for you to notice things, and it is kind of, yeah. Let's just dive in, and let's talk about yeah, just some bits of it. I mean, I think like I guess I could like jump in and just talk about representation of online space in comics, which I think is a really fascinating thing. But I mean, maybe we should give a description of it, in more kind of broad terms first.
Yeah, and it's like more than that. It's more than just a documentation of the online in comics. It's a weird self-referential thing. Yeah, so
Mm,
let's go ahead and take a look at it. Yeah, so an overview of the book, I don't, it's a little hard to give, right? Because it's just her basically spending time with Cyberman on his
yeah,
website and documenting what he does. And that's where you're
yeah.
saying it. Some people have complained maybe that it's got like no story.
I think I haven't heard any complaints, but I think some people will think that. I don't know. Maybe I read my Goodreads too much. I'm too attuned to what people say on that. But like I think you have to. It's a book that you have to be prepared to put in some work just to give it space and notice things and read it more than once as well. Kind of, which not everyone always does with books. But yeah, so I mean, for me, it was only like when I was halfway through that I really realized that this was a real guy, who he just spent all his time on his webcam and filmed his entire life, and that it wasn't fiction. It's kind of, she is interviewing him and asking him questions, because he's kind of there, and he's kind of quite vulnerable, and you don't know why he's doing it. Why does he want to spend his whole life online? And everybody else, or most of the people that talk to him, are kind of trolling him and like
Mm-hmm.
being mean. And Veronika comes on, aka LB Jeffries, which is of course a reference to Rear Window, and is nice to him and treats him like a human being and asks him human questions, and then kind of records his replies. And I don't know if we're worried about spoilers, but at the end, she kind of like he dies, and I googled him as well, and like you can go and see some of his videos online, but I
Mm.
kind of didn't want to. I watched a couple of them, and then I was like, no, I'd rather, like, this is a much more human portrait of him than, I'd rather just read this, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, he died before the book came out, but he did see a rough copy of it, I think, and thought it was really great and loved it, which is kind of interesting that he kind of, that was some attention that he really valued. And you know, he's kind of like, I don't know, you just think, what is he looking for? What is he lonely? Does he want to be famous? And it's never quite clear what his motivation is really, to just be in this kind of self-imposed prison of having people watch him all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years.
Well, and like her motivation at first is unclear as well, I think, because the book just starts out like it's like a diary where and you don't get a sense of her in it right out the gate necessarily. So it looks like a diary of his life, like it gives a date and it gives the time, and it just has that sense. And then that scene where you're talking about where you find out the reference to the movie, I think this is a great sequence. And by the way, yeah, I fully intend to talk about the end of the book because it was so impactful to me. So spoilers if you haven't read it, absolutely buy this book, but I really want to get into the thematic meat of it, and that requires spoilers. But I love this scene where she's at Welcome to Cyberman. So this is like what his web page looked like, and this is in 2016. So it's, you know, it's still a pretty funky looking website for 2016. And she forgets her, or no, this must be the first time she's logging in, and she starts to type LB and then is like forgets the name of the character, and so pulls up in the same browser the movie and goes and finds the character's name and then goes and types it in. But you also get the voyeurism aspect of it, like that she's picking an intentionally clever name because she intends to be a voyeur on this guy's life. And that voyeurism is one of the themes that runs through the book in a really powerful and touching and unsettling way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of her relationship to also that, you know, there's a scene later on where she kind of accidentally gives away her identity, and suddenly he knows who she is. He uses her real name, and she's being seen, and it references Rear Window again. You know, the part of Rear Window where the you know, the protagonist gets seen spying on his neighbor, and there's this like quite dramatic moment where it's just like the you know, everything's kind of turned back on her, and she uses this great device of like her reflection in the screen of the computer that she's, so like the page is the screen, you know, everything that we're seeing is like seen on the page as if it was the screen of a computer. And there's these great moments where you can see her, where like she's reflected in the screen, or you can see her desktop, which kind of says Cyberman. There's got an InDesign file, Cyberman, final InDesign, as if she's like making the book at the same time that we're, you know, that she's having these interactions with him.
Yeah, I've got that one. I've got a sticky note on that one at some point. This is the first time here where you see her face reflected in the screen. So that's what you're talking about right there. The page is the screen, that double page spread. And you see her looking at him. And that was the point where I realized, like, oh, this isn't just this fictional character that has like this diary. What we're seeing is a diary of her logging in and her curating the moments that she thinks add up to her statement on this guy, which is a weird little kind of loop she's getting herself into there, as the voyeur and the author of someone else's kind of narrative. It's a strange but fascinating.
It really is, and it's kind of like, but it's so warm and human, like her interactions with him and his replies to her. Like she says in the back that it's a kind of an act of like anti-trolling. I can't remember exactly what she says, but there's a little kind of statement at the back about it. And yeah, she says here, this made me want to put as much warmth into the book as I could to create a product of anti-trolling. And I really like that, because it's kind of like, it's just sort of turning it around, this horrible anonymous internet space that we're all very familiar with has kind of been sort of reclaimed by her and made into a kind of really human, sort of warm, narrative. I mean, the artwork adds to that, but I think just the whole kind of project of it is kind of quite generous.
Yeah, and there, like, I do like that when she's talking to him, she also includes the other people who are trolling him. Like here, she asks him about your cat, and he says, "Oh, my cat's an outdoor cat." She kind of, whatever, she'll come and go. And someone on the board is like, "She's running from you," And there's just this kind of running secondary commentary of people being assholes while she's asking legitimate questions.
Yeah, and they're always kind of asking him about his sexuality, or just making like nasty remarks, and he kind of just ignores all their comments and just sort of answers her questions mainly. And there's a nice bit as well where she plays him a song that she likes, and he only likes Rammstein, which I think is funny.
there's interesting stuff with music. Like there's a lot of different, me and Sean always use the term remediation of things and reuse of media in here. Those are a couple pages I have tagged. You had asked me to mark this page 32 and 33.
Yeah, so that I just love the way she does the pixelation, like the little glitches. It's kind of subtle, but just on his arms you can sort of see this kind of little pixelation, and in his eyes as well. Like, it's just like, when someone's moving about on the screen and you've got like a bad internet connection. And I'm not sure how she does it either. I think that painted on as anything else would be, rather than, the kind of, you'd be tempted to do it on Photoshop just for the little pixelation filter sort of thing. But it's spot on, it really kind of gives you that moment of the internet's cutting out a little bit. It's on the next page as well.
Yeah, up his arm. I think it's all hand painted, and it's like that hand painted quality of everything and the attention to detail that makes that cold screen interaction human. Like you said, it's such a human book, but there's such an attention to what's happening on the screen. And then her art is just fantastic too, by the way. It's this is like gouache or acrylic?
Yeah,
or
it must be. And then there's like these bits of kind of pencil work as well. Every now and again, like on page 45, oh no, not 45, 47, you can see that there's kind of some pencil work in there as well. Yeah, it's a kind of, really, really nice kind of painterly. You can see a lot of, even though it's quite opaque, you can see a lot of the brush marks, and just sort of, you can see that it's a real thing.
Yeah. And with you especially, like this idea of the physicality of the medium, I could see why you respond to this. And then also, I think I said it when we interviewed, but your work strikes me so much as about penetrating interfaces that I'd see why you'd respond to this book, because you're always like going through the stitchery and trying to talk about connection.
I mean, something I've been thinking about a lot, and this is kind of one of my favorite pet subjects at the moment, is just that the representation of the internet in comics is just kind of comics do it very well. I've been watching you see TV shows now where it's important to the TV show or the film that internet interaction is represented, and like all these little things pop up, these special effects. Well, there was one, I was watching some comedy the other day, and it was about teachers, and the teacher got hacked, their Instagram got hacked, and a rude picture of them got, all the kids in the school had this picture of their teacher like topless or something, And the way they did it, they showed that all the kids had it, was by like having this kind of weird, like little transparent image floating above their phones, you know. So you could see they're all looking at it, but they had to resort to this weird special effect to show that. But with comic, like, this shows how far you can push it in comics. You know, you can paint the internet and kind of re-embody it, and, you know, kind of actually express something of the subjective experience of experiencing the internet in the first person, you know, in a really warm, really kind of material, really authentic way. And yeah, like other mediums aren't as good at that, and I think that's really interesting with comics. It's something that should be kind of you know, something we should shout about a little bit, because, you know, we spend a lot of our lives online, and you know, if comics are really good at showing that experience, then that makes them an important medium, because we don't have to resort to these weird hallucinatory, you know, visions to represent that, you know.
Yeah, I've seen a couple people. The one that comes to mind as someone else, if you haven't read it, I think you should pick up the book, Manjit Top's Feelings. It's another
Okay.
painted book. And that was the first time that I saw someone put an Instagram feed in a comic, and then was like, well, duh, obviously, like, it's already a comic, because we've got all the little panels next to each other on the feed, telling a story, like, if you're not looking at them one at a time. And that was a mind-blowing moment to me, where I was like, oh my god, I'm so into comics and I've never bothered to think about this. So yeah, they're illuminating in that way. It's interesting. Here's a good
Another, I think I mentioned George White, Internet Crusader. I don't know if you can get that over there, but he's done a kind of first person internet narrative on kind of Windows 98. So there's all these weird pop-ups, and it's really like nostalgic, you know, for that era, you know, because he can sort of not only represent the internet, but represent a certain aesthetic, a certain kind of era of kind of.
Yeah, I have it ordered. It's not out in the US yet, but it's like on the way. So I'll be I think that's books coming in like a month or so.
Yeah, there's page 68 and 69 where I don't know if it's him doing it or if it's Veronika doing it, but just like kind of being bored and turning the brightness up and down on the screen, you know.
Yeah.
It's just like a really nice moment. I mean, there's a lot of boredom in this book, and it's kind of like, why would you record I don't know. There's something about, as well, the way that she paints it, and like I say, returning it to kind of, you know, this kind of subjective thing that just it kind of brings into stark focus just how boring the internet is in most cases.
Well,
You know,
and
like when he's listening to go on.
no, just like the longing for connection in that boredom, like when you're sitting around all day. But like this manipulation of the connection too, like there's a control freak aspect to it. Like on this page we're looking at, the 68, 69, I think that's her, because I don't think she would have access to his brightness, but she can like control him in a way by adjusting the image, and she's like playing with her levels of control over their relationship.
Yeah, she's kind of waiting for him to do something.
Yeah. And there's just all kinds of moments of that. I tagged a bunch of different ones. Oh, here, I just like that he's listening to Linkin Park and Rammstein. No, it's just some more looking at her art. Let's see. So there's one here, I'm assuming it's him. where he's playing it's Miley Cyrus, or she's using it, but he's like what I thought about here is like
Yeah.
he's listening or singing Miley Cyrus or playing Miley Cyrus, so he's like using one artist's stuff as content for his show, and then Veronika is like using his content for her show, her book. And so there's like these 2 or 3 levels of remove of like people swiping other people's stuff, and I like that remix element of the interactions. That's where I thought this person has really been to art school and understands a lot of the contemporary dialogues about appropriation and recontextualization. And I don't know, she just seems very informed.
I mean, that, yeah, absolutely. And then when I was reading that Miley, because he listens to a lot of, he watches a lot of YouTube documentaries, and there's one about Miley Cyrus's lifestyle, and it's like not giving him any information about Miley Cyrus at all. It's just like going on and on about her great lifestyle and how if you're in Miley Cyrus's world, it's just one long party and things like that. And it makes, because it's not clear why he wants to do this, and he does talk about being famous, or he wishes he was famous, or his hero is Mark Zuckerberg, but it makes you realize that the actual celebrities are invisible, like no one actually knows anything about them. It's just like loads of information not telling you anything about them, whereas he's just kind of putting everything out there. Like he talks about what he's done and what he wouldn't do on camera, but you know, I think he says he wouldn't get naked, but other than that, like everything's on there, and it's just kind of like a different, like much rawer, much more sort of Andy Warhol type form of celebrity, where it's just like pure, you're just giving up everything of yourself without getting anything back.
Yeah, and actually that's the sequence, you're right, this isn't one of her songs, this is him watching the documentary. Sorry, that's my error there. Yeah, this is him obviously watching, they're talking about Miley Cyrus. Yeah, and I love his vulnerability too, because people do constantly, they're like, okay, you're an overweight guy on the internet doing nothing else, you're obviously like a pervert who sits around jerking off to porn all day. And he's really honest about his sexuality in an almost unsettling way, but then he never like makes that part of what he's doing on the channel either. And yeah, those moments, like, yeah, that's way more affecting than anything Miley Cyrus could ever do.
Really is, yeah, and kind of way more intriguing and interesting than anything Miley Cyrus ever do as well.
And here's another one of those humanizing things that Veronika does with her art, is these aren't statted, each one of these is repainted, even though it's the same scene. So that kind of gives the sense of like flickering, slow changing of a screen. I think that's really smart. Tedious for her, but smart. Here's what you're talking about, the her screenshot, and you see the Cyberman InDesign files. And I really like that, because like she's obviously being a voyeur. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, there's nothing more, in a way, there's nothing more revealing than seeing someone's desktop. You know, it's kind of like, how are you a messy person or a clean person? Are you kind of, you know, and I just think, why would you keep all your InDesign files on, not in folders? You know, things like that.
Why are they not in the Cyberman folder? Why are they just out on the desktop like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, kind of, yeah, it's just kind of a glimpse of her. Again, it's kind of like a way to suddenly show, you know, Veronika in the, you know, in the story.
Yeah, well, and the story becomes part of the story. Like, she's obviously, like, you're starting to suss out her intention to make a book out of it. And then it almost seems predatory a little bit, because she's just like recording this guy's life, and you can tell she's working on it, but she hasn't really broached the subject with him yet. And so you get like this weird kind of ethical consideration about what's going on that I think is really smart. I also think that it's really smart that she's got like Project 2, like Cyberman, like you kind of like really you're enjoying this book, and she's using this as promo for like, well, what's this one? What's this one? It's a
Yeah.
I thought that was a smart way to advertise. Um, but here is where, so here you see that she's working on the book, and it's
Yeah.
only like 15 pages later or so that she talks to him about, well, what if someone did do a film or write a book about you? And he says, it would be so fucking nice if someone wrote a book about me. And you get put right into her brain as an author going, yes, I've got permission.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And like, I think, I mean, given the subject matter, the kind of, although, I said earlier, not a lot happens in the book. It's never like visually boring. She she finds a way on every page to kind of make it compelling, even though you're seeing, you're on page 160 and you're just seeing the same guy in the same chair with the same furniture. Like, he has a different cat at different points in the book, but the scenery doesn't really change, but you never feel like you've seen it before while you're reading it. And that's a great bit where the fly lands on his webcam.
And then on his head.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of like the way that she's always switching up the visual and playing with the just abstraction of it and the composition of it to keep it compelling. Like just introducing this new shape like that. It's also hilarious. It just makes you wonder how much time she spent, because these are curated. She had a majillion other moments she could have picked from, but she picked this sequence because she felt like this was the best ebb and flow of the story.
And you wonder, like, did she screenshot when something like that happened? Did she screenshot it, or did she just do it from memory, or did she do it while she was waiting for him to do stuff? Like, it's while he's asleep, it's like life drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to her more about how she did it now that I've read it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that, like, that process of us wondering about her and how she did it starts to like level up, or it's like the book looks back at you as well. Like there's those moments where when we're wondering about the book in that way, it's almost like seeing ourselves in the screen in the same way she does. And I think ultimately that's what the book is about. There's a sequence in here where it talks about that I wanted to read because I thought it was the crux of the book. I think it's the next one up. I do like too how he eventually gets voice capability, and so she shows the growing technology where she can have actual voice conversations, it looks like.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I was slightly confused about that, but okay. Yeah.
He gets a microphone, I think. And this
Yeah,
is
and
one
then
of those
like
ones
this.
where he's being really honest. It's like, hey, Cyberman, who did you lose your virginity to? Some girl. Have you had sex with a man before? Many times. Did you stick it in or the other way around? I don't like anal. Have you ever sucked dick? I sucked dick very many times. And he's just so, it's like as kind of banal as the beautifully banal as the art is, the way he responds.
Yeah, and it's sort of strangely vulnerable, but at the same time, kind of, I don't know. He's like rising above it all very slightly. These questions, or he's like slightly mechanical in answering them. Like there's something of the kind of digital, like early sort of AIs when they just prompt you or answer questions. It's very short. It's a bit like that.
Yeah, exactly like that. I was thinking AI sex, or not AI, but IKEA sexuality. Like something about him is very IKEA, very like straightforward, simple, interlocking. I don't know.
Yeah, and it seems as well like there is that element in that he kind of orders whatever he needs from the internet. He never really has to leave the house. There is this one bit, page 52, where there's another person, but I think they're just dropping off his shopping for him, and they kind of like, you can see them, page 53, having a drink in the background. But that's the only other character that ever comes in, and I think it's his neighbor, like going to the shops for him.
Okay. I forget because I read it and made a bunch of notes a couple of weeks ago. Did he talk about how he makes his money, that he can afford to keep doing this?
There's the part where no, he says he's in a lot of debt, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He says he has a lot of debts, and then he's got his kind of little, donate. I think Veronika gives him $5 at some point, so he's got his little kind of donate button, and I think he's got some kind of hope that he will get lots of money from doing this. But while I was Googling him, I didn't really go into it, but there was a Vice article about him. I don't know if it was before or after he died, but it seems like he did. He was a notorious character. He had infamously, he had people that logged on, and you'd presume that some of them would donate to him, but I don't know really. But there is that bit where he talks about his debts, and he just says, "I have very many debts," and that's the end of the conversation. A bit like, so even though you're watching him and he's answering really personal questions, he goes into so little detail that you kind of don't really find out that much about him.
Yeah, and he's obviously, like, I like this. This is another page where he's upgrading. So whatever money he's getting, he's putting back into this, because up until now, it's all been text and a pretty stable camera view. And then he starts being able to have, it looks like audio conversations, and then he gets this above head camera view. So he's obviously bought a new camera and is upgrading his rig. And I really like that. And then she ties that into what I think is the kind of narrative crux of the book. So I just wanted to read this bit. He's listening to some kind of self-actualization tapes or something like that on the internet. And it says, lesson number 3, waking up is the key to mastering your virtual reality. Immersed in subconscious programming, we're unaware, but as we're able to observe ourselves, we become self-aware. And she's like purposely putting that like above head, like he's observing himself. Picture with that, we observe ourselves, thereby increasing individual consciousness. And if we continue to progress through self-awareness, eventually we wake as the observer, which is another word for the higher self. And then it goes on a little bit more about that idea of awaking as the observer. And then here she says, choice and simply being present in the now awakens your higher self for as long as you are conscious. And it made me think that this book is a tool for recognizing yourself as the observer. In the same way that she's recognizing herself on the screen as the observer, it's making me realize I'm observing her. And I already love the book, but this is the moment where I thought, man, this is like a exceptional piece of work.
It really is, and it's so well and subtly structured, and it's got, like I said before, it's got so much innovation in the visual language to keep you interested. And I think you're right. This must have gone on for years, and she must have like loads of files and screenshots. But to curate that and pick out the parts that are most kind of appropriate to the point in the book where you are, and the most resonant, so that you understand this kind of, you're watching her, he's kind of watching himself, and then at certain times we're with her when he sees her, and then we see ourselves. It's like that amount of complexity in it's very it's a real feat of comic storytelling, I think, and just so light touch as well, and sort of not, you could be very sort of ostentatious or pretentious about it, but it gets it across without even really sort of going there philosophically, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, like all of the philosophical thoughts about the like levels of remove and self-awareness in the observer, that's all just in between the lines for you to suss out or
Yeah.
not. It's never in your face, and that's really beautiful. In terms of the timeline, the first one that she shows at least is from March of 2016, and as we're nearing the end of the book, we're in February of 2017. So
okay,
this is something that plays out for over a year or so. And you're talking about her awareness of the visual language of comics, and then going with the idea of self-reference. In the middle of this thing that he's listening to, it says moment to moment, and then she goes into what Scott McCloud would call a moment to moment transition and says moment to moment. And I think that's like this extra level of like, yeah, I know what I'm doing with this visual language. It's cute.
Totally. It's kind of, people say comics is like an action medium, or it's associated with traditionally with action, and there's a lot of action in it, but it's just suggested by colors and composition, and there's a lot of movement, even though it's also very claustrophobic and very kind of you're always in the same place, and she's always in the same, very static and immobile.
Here's a good, I mean, just the next page is just him rolling around in bed, but it's completely full of life and motion.
Yeah, it's compelling.
And in terms of action, like this moment, well, okay, this is where she donates, like you said, and this is the moment.
Yeah.
This is to me like high action. This is almost more intense than like a car blowing up in a movie. Is she goes and donates to him, but gives away her name. And then I thought that this is this is a hell of a thing too. Like, thank goodness it typically puts those little stars there, because I get the sense that she would have like drawn her credit card number in there if that's actually what had been on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah, and giving away the credit card number.
Yeah, and is her card number really 069? Like, is it really 69, or is that just a little joke?
It could be, but like I get the feeling as well that if she had accidentally given away credit card details in a graphic novel, it would be less of a big deal than this moment, like you say, which is as dramatic as a car blowing up. But like, it doesn't really matter, because there's no one else looking, there's no one else seems to be logged on or commenting, but just to be seen, to not be anonymous, to not be the observer, is like, this great moment of shock.
Yeah, where he sees the donation and he figures out LB Jeffrey's real name, right? And he's like, oh, yeah. Veronika. And then she pulls back to the screen to where you can see her in it again. Yeah. And yeah, that's such a good moment in the book. And she says, please don't say my name, you're welcome. And then he says her name again. Veronika. And he realizes, I think this is where the book gets super sad. He realizes that this person that he's been having, the one person been treating him nice and been having a decent conversation that he's been connecting with, is like a woman. And I think he gets excited about that, because like the way it ends, and sorry, total spoilers here, but I have to talk about it. Oh, well, then she goes back to the movie where the observer gets observed. And then pretty much the next thing that happens after, full spoilers here, the next thing that happens after she gets caught is, for the first time, he's like taking his shirt off and like working out in his underwear. And it's like, and then as far as I know, that's it. She never logs back in because he ruined it, right? Like,
yeah, right, okay.
He's like, oh, this chick digs me, let me show her my fitness. And like, walk around, and I think she sees that. I don't know because of how she curated it. It could
Yeah,
be not the
right.
first time he's done it, but the order suggests that she really feels like now he's attracted to her and interested in her, and so she can't go anymore.
Or just the relationship's completely different. I mean, yeah, and you've got this like black double page spread just to kind of like separate, that moment from, it's just this kind of sort of black moment in the book that just sort of almost ends it, like it's not going to be the same afterwards.
And not just black, she like painted it or something because there's like texture on it, which is cool too.
Yeah.
um
I feel like the section where it goes to Rear Window again is the only bit that kind of breaks the kind of point of view being on the internet thing, because some of the windows are in front of each other, and I kind of read it as it's just referring to that point in the film,
yeah,
like this is how she feels, the same way that the character in the film feels, where he sees that he's been spotted. There's a bit in that, without getting too philosophical about it, but Sartre writing about Jean Genet and Saint Genet, and he says like crime, the point where you've committed a crime is when you get seen doing it. Before that, it's not a crime.
yeah,
And it's that moment of being seen that not only means that he's seen her, but she's seen herself doing the bad thing, or doing the thing that makes her feel weird and guilty.
yeah. And you're saying this is the one that kind of breaks the internet thing because they're stacked, and it would be a
I think
weird
so,
thing to have the
yeah.
same video open stacked 4 times.
Yeah. And also, she wouldn't really like, open the film again and go to that bit just because that's the way she feels. I mean, I guess she might, but it felt to me like that's like just an expression of, or a clarifying, what that feeling's like.
Yeah, it's more like a metaphor for what's going on in
Mm.
her head than a literal like a diaristic documentary of what's going on. Yeah, I agree with that. And this is, by the way, this is a really, I complain about memoir comics a lot on the channel, and this is a memoir comic in a real, or a diary comic in a really really different way
Mm.
that pushes the boundaries into something so totally new. It becomes completely palatable and really interesting. Um, and then at the end, she does say that she has this bit about this is what I really wanted to know at the end. She goes on a little bit kind of overly explaining, I think, like coincidentally, I just rewatched The Rear Window and blah, blah, but eventually says the thing that I wanted to know, which is, did she ever send him a copy of the book? And
Yeah.
and does, like you said, say, okay, yeah, he saw like he didn't get to see the finished book because he died from cancer, but he did get to see like a rough copy of the book and really enjoyed it. And so that's really nice to have too, to understand as a reader that she got permission, because that kind of gives you an ethical like hands off as well, like, okay, this is all not dirty, it was like acceptable, this wasn't
Mm.
done without his permission.
Yeah. I think I agree as well. There's a bit too much detail in the kind of final, it feels a bit like a statement. I think that that's something that Myriad liked to do. Like in my first book, The Black Project, there's this kind of long kind of interview about what my intention was for it, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like, I think like Myriad, because they publish literary fiction as well, I think they like to kind of encourage, literary fiction readers to read graphic novels, and that it helps to kind of, you know, clarify anything for those that might be bemused. And I think for people that are literate in comics, it's not necessarily necessary to read it, but I understand Myriad's why they do that, because in this country at least, it's kind of there's always questions from people that don't know comics that well.
So you think that it's like something that the publisher asked for to help justify the project and give it a chance, like in serious critical consideration?
Yeah, and I mean, it did, like, there were questions that you wanted to know, but yeah, like I say, I mean, with my books as well, sometimes they require a bit of explanation, and it's good to the materials they're made out of and things like that. So yeah, I think they like to have a little bit of end notes for anyone that doesn't quite get it.
That's unfortunate, because I think that they have such good taste in artists. I mean, everything I've seen from them, her work, your work, and a few other things I've read, is kind of like the peak of the mountain, in my opinion. And you would think that they could trust their audience, which is too bad, because I always think like you don't need to explain it when you've done this good of a job with something.
Yeah, I don't know if they can trust their audience. That's the thing. It's kind of like with Myriad, I've been to a lot of I went to a lot of like literary festivals, and people that don't read comics but read, you think they'd be quite smart. People that read literary fiction, they ask you the stupidest questions, and it's quite startling, actually, kind of the things that they ask you about. So I understand the impulse to do that, and I think it probably does more good than harm, like given their audience.
And you get a sense that they're asking these questions just because it's a graphic novel, that if it was a straight novel, that the kind of stupidity of the question wouldn't happen.
Yeah,
interesting.
Totally. I mean, people say stuff like, I've heard someone, people that write for The Guardian say things like, well, there's no difference between a comic and a movie. What do you call them? A movie, when you do loads of drawings to make,
like a storyboard,
to plan a storyboard. Exactly. There's no difference between a comic and a storyboard. Like, and then another one said, it doesn't like, they'll never be as popular as books because it doesn't leave you enough things to imagine. And he just like, it's just different. That's all. It's just different. You don't have to get it's not going to do the same thing as a novel does. Just because it's a book, don't be confused. It's just different. But so yeah, I understand the impulse to put some sort of explanatory stuff at the end.
Well, I guess if they're not people who are used to being visually sophisticated, then they could be missing out on stuff too. Like even something as subtle as her reflection in the screen, which to me is like a real, like, it makes the point as clearly as you can make it, but it's not done with words, and so you're not explicitly spelling out your point in an essay. For someone who's so word centric, I guess you could miss those things. I don't know. To me, this book is so clear in its intent.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, really. Yeah, it's a great, I wish I'd written it. It's a great book. And her first one as well. I hope she does some more.
This is her first?
Yeah, first graphic novel.
Yeah, okay. So this is a phenomenal, like, this is someone coming out of the gate as good as you can get.
Yeah.
Like a 10 to 11 out of 10 type of comic for sure. And God, I hope she's committed to being a comic artist and not just an illustrator. That would be a loss.
Absolutely. I went to the launch of this, like, before I'd read it, and I met her, and she is really modest and someone of few words, but really kind of really interesting as well, the things that she said. But I'd had like 2 drinks. I was on my kind of, you never get any money for doing graphic novels. It's a horrible gig. If I'd had a couple more, like if I'd spoken to her more later, after I'd had a couple more, I would have got onto my doing comics is amazing. It's a beautiful medium, and there's so much work to do, and there's so much to explore in the form. But I got the first part of my my kind of so I hope she carries on as well, and like find some way to do it, because we were talking about day jobs and things like that, and the things that you have to do to be able to carry on working in shops and cafes and things like that.
So Gareth apologizes if Veronika sees this. 2 more drinks and he would be saying or sober, both saying please make more comics.
Sober,
and if you do see this, we would both love to talk to you and interview, because this is definitely like this came out this year, so this is definitely like my top book of the year, top couple books of the year so far.
I think so too. I'd agree with that.
Highly recommend everyone go get it. And hopefully there's a lot more work to come from, how did you pronounce her last name? Veronika?
I think it's Muchitsch.
Muchitsch. I would totally butcher that. Muchitsch. Okay. Definitely go get Cyberman by Veronika Muchitsch, one of the best books of the year. And off topic now of this, but before we started recording, and this is kind of extra interesting after your comments about the literary critics, you mentioned that you're getting a PhD in comics. Where's that happening, and what does that look like?
I hope I'm getting a PhD in comics. I've still got 2 years left of work. I've done 2 years, one part-time. I've just finished my first full-time year, so I've done 2 years. But it's because I forgot to mention it last time. We were talking about comics and we were talking about all sorts of stuff, and my pa watched the interview and said, "You didn't even like say what you've been doing for the past 2 years." I thought, "Oh yeah." But I'm doing so. Don't ask me the thesis title, but it's to do with materiality and process, and how materials and haptic surfaces can change the meaning of a comic in terms of metaphor and narratology and braiding. I don't know if you're familiar with Gronstein's theory of braiding, but it's just about kind of, it's like in The Watchmen, where the smiley badge keeps getting repeated, and then there's lots of other circular motifs. That's braiding. But what part of my thesis is to show that you can actually use different sorts of materials to link network panels at a distance in a text together. And you see it all the time, flashbacks and just little suggestions of what's already gone or what might be coming.
I think typically, like, in terms of storytelling, people always call that threading. Like, you would have like there's an apple in this panel, and then someone's hand grabs the apple, and then you pull back and see the character, and then they can pass the apple off. Like, that's panel to panel. You're suggesting that you could jump from that apple for 20 pages and come back to it and thread across 20 pages.
The apple could be a motif, and it could like accumulate meaning as the story goes on and become symbolic of things. And all this is kind of part of that relationship. But I think that materials can do that as well, and they can put you in a certain, like Stone Fruit. I've been reading. Have you read The Stone Fruit by
Not yet, no.
That's a great book, but there's use of certain sorts of line and certain styles and certain materials that mean that this is an imaginary space of play. This is a dream. This is a flashback. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Well, and you do that all the time in your work. Like the material choice that you use is always directly tied to the narrative in an extremely powerful and meaningful way. So
and that's something that because it's practice based. I don't know if you have that in the States, but you can explore these issues through your own practice as well. And Home and the one that I've just released, Ashes, are kind of their outcomes, practice outcomes. So you can sort of make practice and then reflect on it, and then it can inform your written thesis, which explains why they're a bit more experimental and pretentious than some of my other stuff.
I'm looking forward to getting my copy of Ashes. I have Home, but you just released, and I'll put a link, Ashes, which is a similar medium where you're drawing on napkins, and so you can see through and unfold it kind of like a Rorschach.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of I've started using a lot of watercolor pencils, so that's my new medium.
So is this degree that you're getting, is this being run through like a literary department, and you're like finessing it to be comics, or is it a comic centric program?
That's a good question. So the guy, my supervisor, is called Roger Sabin, and it's at St Martin's School of Art, and it's kind of supposed to be in the illustration a bit. I think it's a bit more like the comic studies sort of scene in this country. Like, some people are historians, some people are linguists, some people are fine art, some people are kind of sociologists. So it's kind of like a really weird interdisciplinary kind of amalgamation. I'm delivering a paper at a conference next week, and it's really interesting, but it's also difficult because you have to certain terms that you use mean different things in different disciplines. Mm-hmm. So you kind of you have to watch your language sometimes, as it were.
That's been the thing that I've noticed as comics move into a more academic consideration, is I don't think anyone knows how to make a comics program yet, because it is a mix of so many different things. You just wind up with specialists in a lot of other areas, but very few people like yourself who are actually like not just practicing comic artists, but powerful comic artists. Like they'll maybe be a really good writer, but they can't draw, or they'll be really good at drawing, but they're not a terribly great researcher. And the only other guy I can think of, do you know Nick Susanis?
Yeah, the unflattening.
Yeah,
he did it. Yeah, everyone kind of, he did a comic for his PhD thesis, and it's kind of like, you think I could do that as well, but it's kind of easier just to write it as a thesis, actually.
So your thesis is not going to be a comic?
No, I think it's just going to be straight theoretical, written, but with lots of practice outcomes around it that I can sort of refer to.
Okay. I was going to say, like, it would be sad if someone with your power didn't have some actual comic output connected to.
We've got a couple of practitioners that are also comic studies theorists over here. One is John Myers, who's written a lot of really kind of graphic medicine books. And the other, actually, there's more than one, but the two that I'm thinking of right now is the other one, Simon Grennan, who I think even though a lot of what he writes is impenetrable, I was trying to think of a nice way of putting it, and it's tough read, but it talks about intersubjectivity and trying to inhabit different people's style and different people's line. And he did Hellboy in the style of Chris Ware. Was one of his kind of practice things. I'll send you like some pictures of it if you like. But that's his work's very interesting as well, but difficult to get your head around.
I totally need to read that though, because I'm so much about that style mimicry, and like, it was Strange Death breaking down the lines like obsessively, like this is the Alex Raymond line, this is a Stan Drake line.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think it would be very, very relevant to what you've been working on.
I was even doing just like I'd be, sitting in class, and some of my classes are small, like 5 students or something, and so I can't be like talking to them the whole time. I got to let them work. And so I'll sit and doodle, and I had been doing Rip Kirby panels in the style of Michael DeForge, which is crazy because Michael DeForge his style is constantly shifting. But I was trying to think, like, if Michael DeForge took one of these compositions of a Rip Kirby panel and redrew it, what would it look like? Which it sounds like is exactly the Hellboy. So yeah, I definitely need it. You said Simon Grennan.
Simon Grennan, yeah, his book's called A Theory of Narrative Drawing, and it's
Okay.
kind of all his drawing demonstrations are at the back. But his conclusion is that you can't inhabit the indexical mark of another person, but style is, what does he say? He says it's a combination of self-observation and artistic conventions. So when you're developing a style, you're observing yourself making the style, but then it's informed by what's expected of you in that particular time, in that particular society that you're living in. So it's a kind of like two-way street in terms of, what is it, you or is it everyone?
What does he think someone's doing though when they're very explicitly like, I'm drawing like Chris Ware, I'm not developing my own style, I'm trying to get as close to Chris Ware as possible?
You'd probably just call that imitation. I think.
I
I
don't see
don't know.
the thing that I find so fascinating about that kind of stuff is, in the same way that you're talking about materiality as being a threading element that can carry meaning, I purposely use style in the same way, because Chris Ware as a style is so preloaded now with all of that societal understanding of what Chris Ware is about, that as soon as you draw anything like Chris Ware, you're like, you're importing all of this other information into the work, just in the same way that like you're importing information with the materials you use. To me, style has that same impact, and I love that.
It's a fascinating thing. But he did the other one he did it. I have to try and remember, but he was trying to draw in the style of. So he did the Chris Ware Hellboy, but then he was trying to just draw in a kind of 1960s style, and he researched like all these kind of romance comic 1960s type style, and he just researched all the different materials they used, the different settings, the different, like, he had this whole kind of long kind of research where he was trying to figure out if he could make an original comic, but in the style of another place and time. I think that's right. When you read the book, you'll forgive me for not being sure, being able to remember it all, because it's pretty dense.
Well, I'll have to look, because that's something else that me and Sean are always doing, is looking at, like, I know he's more into the color stuff, but like how were things colored back then, and how do you mimic those exact things digitally? And I think there's a whole wave of that I've seen already, people trying to mimic the dot tone patterns and purposely making pages look aged, and all of that is a very big right now. So that book sounds really interesting. It's definitely at the forefront of my thoughts of a lot of the stuff I'm doing. Like, I have a whole book that at some point me and Sean will put into a collection that's every page is in the style of some Batman artist. But there is a Chris Ware page in there just because I wanted to do Chris Ware. He's never done Batman, but Chris Ware does Batman. So that's funny.
Okay.
Well, man, like, I want to see your thesis when it's done.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I'll send you a copy when it's done. But it seems like so far in the future now. But I guess it will just creep up on me. Yeah, yeah. It's a kind, yeah. It's such a difficult thing to talk about, because you kind of like, uh, you kind of realize how little you understand about your own thing that you're studying. It takes such a long time to kind of really get a grasp of what you're trying to do.
Do you ever worry? I worry, and one of the reasons I stayed away from that is I worried that I would quit being like that it would diminish me as a creator somehow. Like, because you're putting
Mm,
a lot of energy into that.
mm.
Um, do you worry about that at all? Like that you understand it too well?
I I did worry about that, yeah, going into it. And there was a part of me that was a bit like, I've done 3 graphic novels now. I felt a bit kind of jaded about the graphic novel thing, hence the 2 beer rant about how, you never get it, to Veronika. But and I felt like I needed a bit of a change of direction. So going in, I was like, yeah, this is probably going to ruin me as an artist. I'm probably going to not be able to make comics anymore, or just make really boring academic ones. But actually, I don't think so. Like, I've actually
Okay.
really enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. I've really enjoyed reading all the theory, and I think that it's kind of, I've still, because it's got the practice-based element. It's okay to work off instinct over here doing your practice, and then
Mhm.
just like be reflecting and analyzing and talking about other people's comics. So it's kind of the way that the PhDs work over here. It's fine to do that. It's kind of like, they call it kind of critical making, knowledge through doing. There are things, and particularly like with materiality, you can't you can't just sit there theorizing about what ink's going to do, or what you know someone's response is going to be to an embroidered surface. You have to like do it and make it, and then write up those findings. And
Yeah.
not everything that you do has to be tied to the PhD. So I can still make comics about you know other things that you know are accessible, and people don't necessarily need to know any of the issues around. I mean, I'm very like, I don't think it's important in a way. I don't think it's important for a reader to know all this comics theory. I don't think it's important for a maker to know all this comics theory. It's just like analytical tools for a tiny little group of obsessive people who kind of like really want to get under the skin of like how the medium works, and what it's doing and what it can do, and answer a few burning questions about you know about like, yeah, what comics do.
Well, and that's where the academic stuff is exciting to me. I talked about it on the channel before going to a conference, and there was like maybe a quarter or an eighth of the papers there were the kind of thing you're talking about, like getting under the skin of it and talking about what it does, and the rest of it was like social studies papers studying comics, or historians studying comics, and that just like took every, I don't know, it just took all my joy about comics out of it, because I wanted
Yeah,
to go talk to the people like you that are like geeking out about the behind the scenes, behind the page kind of stuff, and it turned me off a little bit. So it's good to know that there is a component of people like digging into the mechanics in a way that's compelling.
yeah, yeah, there is for sure. And kind of also writing about it in a way that's accessible, and kind of you know uh, not just sort of deconstructivist arguing over what we should call panels and breakdowns, and this sort of thing, because there is a lot of that. But I mean, one book that I really love that I would recommend to anyone is a book called Comics and the Body by Esther Zepp, which like kind of really argues for kind of embodied understanding of react comics, and how we respond to comics like haptically, and the actual reading, the actual action of reading, rather than just kind of what comic studies can be, which is just thinking up different sorts of terminology and things like that.
Well,
Yeah.
careers need to be had, but I think
Yeah, for sure.
like it's funny to me too, because I do think here in the States, I don't know, I don't even know of a place that has a PhD level, but uh it's good to hear that they're tying practice to the theory, because I think those two things would typically be split out here. There would be the theory, which would be like you get the degree from writing the papers, and then there would be the practice, which is like would be like my MFA, where you get the degree for going and making paintings for 2 years.
Mm.
That you found something in the middle is interesting, because like already if you just looked at your production of your books, like you deserve a PhD in like making comic, like in terms of like what I did. I went and made paintings for 2 years, they gave me a
Yeah.
degree. Like you've
Yeah.
made enough great comics that you should have a degree in it already, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in some ways, I think like I wouldn't have made any of my comics if it had been this kind of, because I studied fine art and kind of it felt. See, this is the trouble I have. There was so much sort of chin stroking and kind of over analyzing things in my fine art degree. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, and in fine art in general, that I don't want comics to be like that. But then there I am writing away some, academic paper. But I think that comics making, I'm not necessarily saying there shouldn't be a degree program for making comics, but it should be outside academia. And if people just want to make unself-conscious comics without like having to worry about this sort of all these analytical tools, and that's totally right. I think that it can definitely hamper. I mean, I've seen so many people go through art school, they love drawing, and they come out just and they hate drawing, and they're just worried they haven't read enough books.
Yeah, and I told, like, when I left that conference, I went into that conference going, finally comics are getting paid attention to at the level of respect I think they deserve. And I left going, you can't fucking have them. Like, no, don't let the academics get a hold of it. These are my special thing, and don't ruin them.
Yeah.
But I do get a sense, like with your work and Veronika's work, that I'm finding more and more work in the last year that seems like it's being made by people who do have the full power of the academic, whether it be just art school or some other kind of theoretical thing behind what they do, but then they're still making accessible work. And it's a type of power that I don't think I've experienced in comics before. Cyberman being one of those, like the amount of artistry, but also like really intelligent decision making. And not saying that someone like Chris Ware or Dan Clowes or some of those guys from that wave of smart comics weren't doing those things too, but this feels like the next step to me. Like it's not, those were comics that were still very aware of comics, like the status of comics and trying to prove something with comics. And like your work and Cyberman and some of the other, Roman Muradov is another person who I just found, they don't seem at all concerned having to prove anything. And so the power of them's coming from some other place. And it's I haven't quite put my finger on it yet. And maybe since you're one of the people making them, you know better than I do, but there's something new going on. Or maybe it's just because it's new and it seems exciting because it's new. I don't know, but
I think maybe that those sort of, the Chris Ware and Dan Clowes stuff was still kind of rooted in the alternative San Francisco 60s counterculture. There's such, and you see a lot of stuff coming out of the States that's going back to that kind of sort of countercultural stuff, which is good. but it's kind of, it sort of presupposes a certain reader and a certain attitude and a certain kind of stance, and maybe probably even politics. Whereas I don't think there are other, the books I like don't really know who they're for. They're just kind of like looking for people that understand them. And I think as well, there are a lot of kind of people that felt like me about fine art courses, and you just come out and you go, I can't make fine art anymore because it's too conceptual, it's too kind of text based, it's all about ideas and language. I mean, particularly kind of in the 90s and noughties, it's too kind of cliquey, and also it's a terrible money laundering industry. So you just go, what can I do? And some people happen upon comics, and it's like, okay, here's a medium where I'm allowed to draw, I'm allowed to say something about something, I'm allowed to tell a story, all the things that you're not allowed to do at art school. Can't do narrative, can't do representational drawing, can't make. So kind of, I think, not just fine art, either illustration and animation courses as well. All these things are hard to get into, and people just end up getting frustrated making a little comic just to sell to their mates for fun, and then they get kind of sucked into, the kind of comic scene and end up doing graphic novels.
That's definitely been like my brother just texted me the other day, hey, can I commission you to do a painting? I said, you know what, man, I don't think I'm ever going to paint again. Because not that, I mean, there's a place in the fine art world for representational stuff now, again, thankfully, but I think the fine art world just went so far down its own belly button of like art about art about art about art that it became its own analytic endeavor, and there's nothing visual about it. It's just an ongoing argument about what counts, and there was no ability to communicate anything about anything other than art. Like, you couldn't make an art piece that talks about loneliness and connection and make it in the fine art world. It has to be about the history of art. And maybe that's the thing that I'm saying separates this stuff out from like the Klaus era. And what you were saying is it's so aware of its own history. Like Dan Klaus and Chris Ware are very aware of their history, and they're speaking to the history of comics, and it's almost starts to become comics about comics. Like your work in Cyberman is just, it's a comic about, it's someone who has all the knowledge and the tools of all of those people, the abilities and the knowledge of art school, but then they're just using it to talk about connection on the internet. Or I mean, your work has that sense of connection too, and so instead of looking inwards anymore, it's using all the tools to look back outwards with all of the power of everything that came before it. And that's really refreshing to me, because that is the thing I was looking to get away from in the fine art world too, is this, like, I wanted to talk about the world, and they kept telling me, well, you can't talk about that, that's not what we do anymore.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I'd love to know, what comics Veronika has been reading, because it's not entirely obvious. Whereas, with I mean, British comics had a great time in the 60s and 70s, particularly the 70s and 80s. But the awareness of it is very, very low. There was a long time where there wasn't really very much going on. So there's just that kind of break, that fallow period where, kind of new influences can come in. Whereas if you're, working in an industry or a scene where there's a lot of, a lot of money's been made, there's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of people that have gone before you, and you've got to pay your dues, and you've got to, people know what to expect. In this, I think I was saying in the interview last time, no one until recently, no one really, people still don't really know what a British graphic novel looks like, or what British comics look like, unless you go back to the 80s or early 90s. So it just makes you free to make it up as you go along, which is kind of very, for an art, and that would be my couple more drinks kind of feel about, like, there's so much to do, there's so much that hasn't been done, you can do absolutely anything. There's you don't have to page used to anyone. It's just, you can reinvent, I mean, most people in this country don't even understand that comics aren't for kids or superheroes. So, how much freedom is there? Whereas with fine art, once Duchamp had made his urinal, it's basically just repeating that kind of gesture infinitely for 100 years.
Oh, still, yeah. Like there's before and after Duchamp, basically.
Yeah.
But like I think that's the other thing that I feel in your work, in Veronika's work, that I've gotten so sick of in the even like the Fantagraphics, as much as I like their stuff, that whole thing, it feels like it's still doing the 1980s, hey, comics aren't just for kids anymore. And it's like the comics are almost saying that, like a Dan Clowes comic and a Chris Ware comic is almost like, here's a comic that's not for kids anymore. Whereas your work at Cyberman is just like, I don't know, like I'm just going and making a thing. And it doesn't feel like it's engaged in that ongoing effort of gaining respect. It's just assuming that respect is already there and proceeding forward. And I think that's what it, like, I don't even like having that conversation because I don't like to acknowledge it. It's just, it's an old dead conversation to me. The battle's been won, quit talking about it. And I think that's another thing that's I'm feeling in this new wave of work that I haven't quite put my finger on, is not even thinking about that anymore. Just make.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I think you're right. I mean, at some point, I certainly just stopped caring what. I mean, I don't think I ever worried that much about who the perceived audience were, but yeah, at some point you realize I really enjoy doing this, and today I've done a page, and tomorrow, if I get time, I'll do another page, and then that's it. And then a few years later, you've got a book.
A strange book about a man making his own sex dolls, or a strange book about watching yourself watch a man on the internet.
Yeah, you can't really worry too much about what people are going to think if you're making work like that.
Okay. No, and that's what makes it so powerful. Both of these books. So if you have not got Gareth's work, definitely I'll put a link to his website, and you should be reading all of Gareth's work. It's just as good. It's like the top of the peak type of stuff that we're talking about. And then we both definitely put our support behind Veronika Muchitsch Cyberman as one of the best books of 2022, no doubt. Thanks for joining me, Gareth, and thanks for making sure that I ordered a book I had my eye on. And I'm really excited to talk to you about it. I've really appreciated it.
Great, thanks for talking to me. I enjoyed it, and yeah, do it again sometime.
Do you have any?
Next time Sean moves, we'll do it again.
No, we'll have you back with Sean on as well. Cool. We like to do a three-way. Do you have anything? I know. What do you want to promote that's out right now?
What of my stuff or event?
I don't know. Your own other books that we should read.
Yeah, all my other books. Yeah, I'll promote them. And yeah, the comics and zine fairs are just coming back. I don't know when this video is coming out, but there's a comic and zine fair happening at the end of my road called South London Comic and Zine Fair. I don't know if anyone who watches this lives in South London, but if you do, check that out.
What's the date on that? I'll put this out.
So that's the 10th of July.
Oh yeah, this will come out before then.
Yeah, okay. So get down to South London Comic and Zine Fair, South Norwood.
And throw Gareth some money.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Have him sign some money. Have him sign your chest and get it tattooed.
Yeah. If you want, yeah. I'm up for that.
If you're up for it. All right. Well, thanks again, Gareth. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks for following along, everyone.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.